Hey, what's up, Bronze Brigade? It's Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and we are joined today by my guest, Brandon Montclare. Hey, Brandon, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Christopher. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, thanks for being here. It's a real honor to talk to you, especially about the new project you have coming out. For people that don't know, Ducktales #1's launching on November 6th. New comic book coming out from Dynamite. I'm super excited about this. As a childhood fan of Ducktales, watching Ducktales with my daughter now, who's 6 years old, so she's right that prime age. What can you tell us about this new series coming out, Brandon?
There has been a lot of DuckTales recently in a reboot a few years ago now it's going. But just that it is, as I said, the one that you remember and the one that I remember. It's set in the 1987 continuity. And a lot of that is also influenced by the old comics before that, going back to, really Carl Barks that kind of influenced the DuckTales cartoon. But since Don Rosa was such a big influence of Carl Barks, so kind of a little bit of the Don Rosa feel, a little bit of the Carl Barks feel, and the original cartoon. So it's the one that people like you and I remember.
And from what I saw on the preview of this, it looked like the lens for this story might start out with kind of deep diving into Uncle Scrooge's kind of history and how he made his millions. Is that kind of accurate? Is that the kind of main plot of this first issue?
Yeah, sorry, just almost knocked my camera off. But yeah, I'm getting too excited. No, it's actually the first 5 issues. We're focusing on Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie because there's so many great characters in DuckTales, and but we figured, that's such a great relationship and a lot of stuff you can do on a comic page with that kind of thing. And the lens of it is more so that if you had an uncle like Uncle Scrooge McDuck, you'd always be wanting to hear more and more stories from him, right?
Yeah.
And so it's always when you think of DuckTales, I think you think of foreign lands and buried treasure and even outer space and time travel and all the different kinds of stuff and giant robots and all the kind of things that you can get out of that. But the kind of idea for the first 5 stories is to keep it in Duckburg, and it's the old cliche that Gotham is a character in the Batman mythos, and Duckburg is a good character in the DuckTales mythos. So we're going to really explore that, and the idea is, as much as Huey, Dewey, and Louie want to ask their uncle how he found this buried pirate's treasure, or found this special cachet of diamonds in some weirdo place, that he's trying to tell his nephews that no, you can just walk outside, and whether you go to the library or the movie theater or any place else, there's a adventure that can be had. So that's kind of the main purpose of the first arc. But that being said, it wouldn't be DuckTales without all that other cool stuff, right? So we're using a flashback. So in every issue, there'll be a couple of different flashbacks, little short things, and that goes back into history, kind of how Scrooge made all his money, and that gives you a flavor of all the weirdo stuff that you can directions that you can go into. It lets us kind of feature some of the supporting characters, and especially a lot of the villains, and that kind of, and it's a nice mix. People seem to like it, and I like it. I'm happy with how it came out, and I can't wait for people to read it.
Right on. Well, I am curious, hearing about all that. You're talking about some of the classic stories. What was your origin with DuckTales and kind of your history there? And then maybe to kind of follow that up, can you kind of talk a little bit about how you got involved on this particular title with Dynamite?
Sure. I certainly watched all the cartoons when I was a kid. It's a funny thing, though, because, you look, I've been talking about this a lot, and you look back and it's kind of silly. I think, when I thought of DuckTales, I was more into G.I. Joe or Transformers, you know what I mean? And certainly the more oddball stuff. I always used to say, hey, do you remember Galaxy Rangers? Do you remember Inhumanoids and stuff like that? So I definitely wasted a lot of time eating cereal and watching cartoons, and not just Saturday mornings, right? They were on after school also.
Yeah.
It was certainly DuckTales. I would think that, that's for little kids. When I was a little kid, I'd say, that's for little kids. I want to watch something that's really cool, like He-Man. And that's, to me, that sounds ridiculous. All due respect to He-Man fans, I love He-Man. DuckTales was probably, like I said, geared to younger people in all ages. Like you said, you have a 6-year-old, I have an 8-year-old who likes it a lot, but I have a 15-year-old who likes it a lot because it really was a better quality cartoon than a lot of the other stuff, and it holds up so well. And it's got not just the stories, but just the animation and the characterization and the music and a lot of them. And it's such great stuff that I remember it fondly. And like I said, if I had to be tied to a chair to write something, I'd rather be tied to the chair writing DuckTales than Thundar the Barbarian. Although I love Thundar the Barbarian,
Nice.
But it's just and that's just me personally. So and how I came to be on this project. I did Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur for Marvel for a whole bunch of years. I co-created that character. I'm somebody who they sometimes call if they have something that they want to do all ages. And if anyone's read Moon Girl, it's not a kid's book in the sense of a lot of times, you get comics or you get cartoons or novels, and they're kind of, in my opinion, they're appealing towards the parents who buy the books for the kids instead of appealing to the kids themselves. But beyond that, it's like, I really think of, why wouldn't an adult enjoy all that stuff? You can look at the old Warner Brothers cartoons with Bugs Bunny, and to me, they're still hilarious and they're so well done.
Definitely.
And I think anybody who could, I can't think of anybody at any age, even if you've never watched it before, who can't watch old Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons and think that how brilliant they are, So I don't want to say I take pride in it, but it's kind of when I focus on a kid's book, it's kind of my mission. And I was Nate Cosby at Dynamite reached out, and I already knew that Dynamite was doing a few Disney properties, and they were kind of all over the map. Like they're doing Nightmare Before Christmas and big properties like that, but then they're doing a lot of those villain things, like they did a whole miniseries on Cruella de Vil and all these other things. Darkwing Duck was already out, obviously.
Right.
And I said, oh well, they're good teams on those books, and they were being well received, and Dynamite was pushing them. And I said, all right, so you have the conversation like you would do with any publisher, really. But it was a pretty short conversation because I was thinking in the back of my head, well, I wonder what are going to be my options. Because if it's from like the classic stuff, or some of the stuff from when I was a kid, I'm familiar with it. And like I said, I have 2 daughters now, and the oldest one is 15. So it's from the last 15 or so years, I'm kind of familiar with it. But that stuff in between, it's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. There's a great Moana book that Greg Pak is doing, but I don't know anything about. Not Moana. Lilo and Stitch he's doing.
Right.
Moana actually is one that I do know. But so and I don't even know if there was a long list. The first thing he said was DuckTales, and I was like 100% on board because I like DuckTales, but it's also for people in the know. Like I said, if you're a Wednesday comics type of guy, you go back to the Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge stuff, and that's it's Hall of Fame to say the least. It's Mount Rushmore type of a character that you have a relation to, and as much as it's not so big here in Europe, it's still huge. You know what I mean? In different places, Uncle Scrooge is such a great property, and because I could do it in the 1987 continuity, and because they all had an appreciation for Barks and wanted that to come through in the new series. It was really something I wanted to jump on, and it could be intimidating. You could say, well, I don't want to follow those, that guy particularly, but not Don Rosa either. But as a writer, and I'm working with a team of artists, that I said, oh yeah, this is something I can't say no to, and I said yes.
Right on. Well, we're glad you did. I definitely can't wait. I know I'm going to love reading this with my daughter. That does kind of, you mentioned this a little bit, and I'm kind of curious what some of the thought process is here when you're working on such a storied property, and you're bringing it out in 2024, and you're thinking about that audience. How much of your process when you're kind of plotting out the story and even in the dialogue and all that, are you tailoring it for the 2024 audience? Are you tailoring it for the nostalgia audience and the people is it kind of a combination of that? Like, how do you balance that?
It definitely is a combination. I've never thought of it in those terms before, but the first thing that comes into my head is that you make it timeless, because all that stuff is timeless already. So it's not like I'm inventing it. And that's kind of maybe a hoity-toity or even conceited thing to say, like, oh, I want it to be read forever. It's not that I mean, of course you want your work to endure. You want people to enjoy it. But to me, it's a stylistic choice also. It's like, oh, you don't want to be too current. You don't want to reinvent the character so much, and that's just, like I said, a personal creative choice. You can certainly look at the 2017 reboot, and that's what they did. They said, hey, well, how can we change this? How can we make Huey, Dewey, and Louie different? Let's give a stronger female character, so we'll age up Webby a little bit and make her obviously the kind of the almost the moving force in the reboot. But to me, it's like it's such a perfect and such a classic concept. And like I said, and I can talk about Carl Barks and talk with other comics people about that, and they get it. But I can talk about anybody waiting online to pick up my 8-year-old after school, and they all remember the DuckTales cartoon because they're all around my age, you know. And so in that sense, it's such a classic, and I think, you know, it's such a great thing to work on. That and to me, that's easy because I don't need to, you know, I've you know, Devil Dinosaur was an old Kirby comic, obviously, and we totally reinvented that for Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Moon Girl is a new character. Even though she's a part of the Marvel universe, you know, you kind of have to introduce her and get people to know it, and also tell something that's a fun, you know, kind of sci-fi superhero tale. With DuckTales, it's like, you know, it's really just keep it simple, which is not always easy creatively, but it's certainly easy to explain. Although I'm going on and on about it. It's good. Yeah, it's a type of thing where you just, I'm happy to be able to kind of do stories in those veins, and the voices are still in my head from the old cartoon. And I'm obviously writing a comic book in 22 pages a month is a lot different than a 22-minute episode. You get a lot less done. But, you know, I'm also, you know, been doing it long enough that I kind of get how to do that part, I hope. Yeah, so the approach is, yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, it's you can call it a love letter, but it's not like it's totally without any kind of like interest or, you know, that I'm alive today and doing it. And, you know, Tommaso Aranda, the artist, is alive today and doing it, and you're always putting some of yourself into your work.
Yeah.
And yeah, so nostalgia is probably, you know, that would be the short answer if you gave me those, if it was a multiple choice, as you put it up. But, you know, nostalgia can be a trap too, because it can be too, you know, it could be too deferential, or it could be too saccharine even, you know. To me, you always, it's worth, anything worth doing always has a little bit of humor in it, you know.
Yeah.
I said, you know, I worked at Vertigo for a few years when I was at DC. And it's like, I remember, you know, with a certain pitch, and like I said, it's long enough. I mean, I won't give all the members involved, but, you know, Karen Berger, who's created Vertigo, ran Vertigo, is 100% connected to Vertigo. There was a pitch that I had, and she goes, "Oh, is this funny? Because we don't really do humor here." And I'm thinking, like, you don't do humor. Like, I read, how many issues was Preacher? Was it 60 something issues, right? I said, oh, I know that there's a lot going on there, but to me, that's a funny book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Dark Knight Returns, they talk about how they made Batman grim and gritty and everything else. I look at Dark Knight Returns and I see humor, and I see joy, and I see excitement, and I see things that you know, to kind of get you up on your feet. And that's why I kind of like the sequels to Dark Knight, you know, Strikes Again and everything else, because it kind of kept that vibe to it, where sometimes, you know, comics, whether they're Batman or a superhero book or anything else, they try, you know, they keep it so flat and dour. So to me, it's like, you gotta put humor into it. And, yeah. And it's sometimes tough to put humor in, because you have to be able to take a dig at yourself. I think, you know, as much as Moon Girl worked, it was because it was about the smartest girl in the world. And so, well, how do you write that month after month? Well, my trick to it was, why does the smartest person in the entire world keep making dumb decisions? You know? And so that's the kind of thing too. So with Disney, you know, they're kind of precious about things, and rightfully so. They have to protect, you know, the legacy of DuckTales and Uncle Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie and everybody else. But yeah, you try to find like a little bit of an angle to make it, to have that bit of a humor, and that's what I think that makes it all ages, because kids just want to see the adventure, you know. And it's, you want to always have a moment that kind of tugs at the heartstrings, and that's not easy to do either, but you can kind of put it in there. But you have to have, like I said, the balance. You have to have like just the tiniest bit of a bite, which is why like SpongeBob SquarePants works and stuff like that. You have to have a little bit of that humor in it. And that's definitely 100% in all the old comics from the 50s on up.
Totally.
Yeah, but it's not something that always makes its way into the cartoon. Not just DuckTales, even the Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur cartoon. Like I said, they took it. A lot of the things that she causing problems for herself or the world causing problems to themselves are blunted. And so that's kind of the balance you go to. And it's me and it's Disney and it's the editor Nate Cosby and it's everybody else trying to say, do it. And honestly, like I said, if you know me or my stuff, it's not like it's going to be some hard thing that you reinvent that's so tragic. No, it's you find humor in the subtlety of it. But like I said, that's what I think also makes it all ages. It works on different levels.
Nice. Well, so we've talked about the classic animated universe quite a bit, and I think that's very fitting. Going into this, I mean, I'm sure you refreshed yourself on that series and stuff. Did you have a favorite episode or arc that stuck out to you that you really kind of, or maybe a couple that you kind of used as maybe touchstones for coming back to this new series?
Yeah, there's a certain wisdom, and again, there's people are on different ends of the spectrum, but Nate Cosby, his advice, and was kind of the advice that I would give back when I was an editor, or if I was an editor, which is like, you don't really have to know everything about the old stuff. You don't have to be an expert. And they say, okay, and then the ellipsis ... And maybe it's better if you don't know absolutely everything, right? Because you can get too caught up in the stuff. But yeah, so I said, well, I don't worry about kind of falling into any of those traps. So I definitely said, I'm going to fire up, Disney Plus and start watching a bunch of these. And and then it really does. It's like, I want to put this in and I want to put that in, and it's little things. And so you'll see in the early issues, like issue 2, they go to the town movie theater, and I wanted to do a kind of that story. I came up separately, and I literally did a Google search. So, DuckTales movie theater, and there is, a Scrooge-orama dome, and they're having a horror movie marathon in it, and it's just a small part of one episode. But I said, well, and it wasn't even, it's a lot easier to say, I'm just going to take all that stuff and put it on the page, but I didn't do it because it was easier. I did it because it's like, this is so great. Again, like I said, you only have 22 pages to tell a story. So you got to use stuff that people know. So everyone goes to the movies, right? But okay, you use all that stuff. But then you say, what was about this one half of an episode where they had, they were in the movie theater, and then they were playing, it was a Count Dracula versus, Frankenquacker or whatever it is. And I said, I'll just have that movie playing also because it looks so cool, and I wish I saw more of it in the cartoon. So yeah, little things like that do come through. Nice. I really like a lot. Like I love, and here's where I can't do it. I really liked going back and looking at some of the episodes. Doofus, and then there's Super Do. He was like the kind of awkward kid, and he becomes a superhero. It's like, you could do a whole series on that, So I haven't used them yet. It'll be later on in the year, I think, that I get to go, and it'll probably be one of the Junior Woodchuck stories with Doofus. But
nice.
Like that one, I said, you know what, I shouldn't do that because, and maybe that's because it wasn't a background element like the Scrooge-orama dome was, right? It was such a well conceived and realized episode that I said, I'm not going to do better than that, so I'll do something else. But yeah, it's like things that I didn't think I want to do. Like I said, why would I ever use, Launchpad's everyone's favorite, so I'll use Launchpad as much as I can. Gyro Gearloose has been around forever, and he's good to use in a page because he can be inventing something cool. So I'll use him, and Gizmo Duck is kind of loud and bombastic and almost annoying, so I don't want to do that. And then he becomes like the character I most want to work with now, right? And I don't have
hear that.
Yeah, I don't have my Gizmo Duck story thought out yet, but I'm definitely going to do one because it's such a great voice that he has and such a great character. And as much as I think his visuals are kind of goofy, I said, no, but they're so cool. Like I want to put it in. You got to be careful of that because you are doing a book for everybody in all ages. So are little kids today going to think Gizmo Duck is lame? I don't know. I don't know if you're an X-Men fan, Claremont X-Men fan, but there was. Someone always asks me, if you could do any X-Men book, pick Wolverine. That's a smart thing to do. You get a big audience. As much as I do kids' books now, I grew up on Punisher shooting Wolverine in the face with an Uzi and stuff like that. And I said, I wish I got some more stuff along those lines. But do you remember Nimrod, the character?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I said, so Nimrod, when I was a kid, I hated that character. You know what I mean? And I hated the way that Romita Jr. drew him, and he looked like a big jolly rancher, and he was called Nimrod, which is so silly, right?
Yeah.
But man, like I said, if you gave me a choice and you said, "Oh, you want to do Wolverine or Nimrod?" I mean, you know, I'd pick Wolverine, but part of me would say, "Oh, you should pick Nimrod. Do a Nimrod story," you know. So I don't think Gizmo Duck is that either obscure or difficult to make a kid like. But you kind of want the challenge of saying, no, this character is really cool, and so you kind of go all over the map, But that being said, to me, Uncle Scrooge is such a great character, and Huey and Louie, who to me are kind of like a 3-in-1, and that you can do things interesting with dialogue. Obviously, you can do things interesting moving them around the page, which would be the artist Tommaso's job, but. I don't want to go away from Huey, Dewey, and Louie as these people who look up so much and they're going to be influenced by this uncle. And then the counterpoint to it is, well, what effect do they really have? What is the effect of being a hero? Scrooge, as much as he's gruff and he only cares about money, how does he get softened a little bit or learn a little bit himself because of the adoration he receives? And that's like, you want to do so much of that. And you don't have room for everything. So I have to try to keep it honest and make it a Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie book. And that's the first 5 issues, but I think that's going to carry through the whole series. And honestly, looking back, I was surprised because I remembered, Mrs. Beakley and Duckworth and, and the Beagle Boys and anybody else and Glomgold and anyone else you could throw in there. But a lot of those cartoons really are just Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. So,
yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, I'll need 100 issues before I can get to the Caveman Duck. Why am I blanking on his name?
Ooh, that's a good pull. Yeah. Well, and I mean, you mentioned a few characters, so you may have already mentioned your answer to this question, but I was curious, if there were any kind of favorite or obscure characters or anybody that you wanted to make sure you kind of worked in. Maybe that's a character from that universe, or maybe it's maybe a cameo, like I think we'd all love to see a Donald cameo at some point. Who knows if something like that'll happen. But do you have any ones of those that you're kind of pushing to sneak in there or anything like that, or any favorites you hope you can get to one day?
Yeah, well, there's some characters I'm not allowed to use.
Sure.
Which, like you said, which are, and that's just the name of the game, so it doesn't it doesn't bother me. But Donald Duck, like, I can't use. You know what I mean? It's because it's just Disney and they're kind of the managing of all their properties. They say, okay, well, no, just do DuckTales. Donald wasn't in the original one, and Donald, if we ever do a Donald Duck comic, we want that to be discreet and separate.
Kind of silo it out a little bit.
And that's exactly where that they use that the properties are siloed. So it's really, so characters where you might say, oh, yeah, we should do more with that type of thing is interesting. Like even Darkwing Duck, I'm not allowed to use. And to me, Darkwing as not a real person is like I said, maybe that's the writer in me who's going to overwrite something. But I would just like to have them reading Darkwing Duck comics. You know what I mean?
Right. Kind of a meta.
But even that's like, oh, no, we do a Darkwing thing. So I said, I don't know. If I sell 1 million copies and I'm doing it for a couple of years, I'm sure they'll, change their mind. But for now, it's, no, keep it with the main continuity. So for that, a character I couldn't wait to use. So I put her in one of the first flashbacks because, as I was saying earlier, it's focusing on, Duckburg and just the nephews and Uncle Scrooge. But Magic at Dispel is so cool, right? A cool voice, but a great character and a great character to give to the artist, so to speak. I always say my philosophy of writing a script is like being a batting practice pitcher in baseball, which just means, your job is to throw it down the plate and let the artist hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
And just literally that she uses magic, but she's got a great design. There's always, she's obsessed with Uncle Scrooge's dime, but you can kind of play off of that a little bit to see, well, what else is she obsessed with and what's his kind of feelings towards that. And, not that there's anything, that's wink, nod that I put in the scripts, but I think, like I said, there's the tension between those two characters and she's just so visually awesome that I said, as soon as I'm bringing in one of the other characters that I'd like to pepper the story with. The first one I went for was Magic of Dispel.
Right on.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to using Glomgold because Uncle Scrooge, Scottish, and for during first kind of working on how am I going to approach this these scripts. It's like, well, do you do anything to kind of preserve the accent, the Glaswegian accent, in the dialogue as you're writing it? And it's just it's kind of too hard, and everyone hears Scottish Scrooge anyway. They play it straight, and the comics always played it straight, especially like in the 50s. But any kind of comic adaptation played it straight. And he has his sayings and a little bit of a he'll do an exclamation that might be Scottish.
You got to get an ack in there every once in a while, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but to make up for it with Glomgold, I say, I'm going to make him sound like worse than Grant Morrison does in an interview. You know what I mean? It's like, because he's originally, it's interesting. Originally he was like from South Africa, but during the cartoon they just made him another Scotsman. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go overboard, and I'm going to try to make it. I'm going to try to dialogue it, the lettering, literally, and not that Fabio Emilia does the lettering, but just saying with the script, okay, let's try to make it sound. Let's write it out using whatever spelling most sounds like somebody from Glasgow. So yeah, like I said, you have little things all over that you want to put in, and you have to be judicious though, because you can get caught up in that. And I do all the time. Everything I do, I overwrite, and so I finish it, and then I got to take a lot out, and then the artist's got to take a little bit out also, and make it all work. Yeah.
Well, and that actually, you just segued perfectly into what I wanted to talk about next. I'm always curious. I usually ask the reverse this when I talk to artists, but when I talk to writers, I think a lot of people watching are really curious about the creative process and how it works. And in my experience talking to writers, there's a couple different types of approaches to this. But when it comes to writing the script, how detailed are you in setting up the visuals for the artist? Are you ultra detailed, or do you I know you said you kind of want to put that fat pitch right over the plate for them to hit it out of the park. Yeah. But are you just queuing up the scene and letting them use their full imagination, or are you trying to give them as much detail as possible to create what that look is going to be for that panel?
Yeah, I approach it, and I rip off. I don't know if I don't know if he came up with it himself, or if he took it from someplace else. But I worked when I was working at DC. I got to work with Frank Miller for a little bit, and he's such a big influence, and I'm such a big fan. But also, to me, his scripts were always the best, even though I'm not sitting and drawing anything. But as the editor, assistant editor, it was always like, okay, he has this way of doing it because he's an artist himself, right? Where it's like, you give the kind of one line stage direction, Uncle Scrooge surprises the three boys, right? Something similar to that. And literally, not to go too far down the rabbit hole of the process, that'll be like the first line in bold. And then you might say, okay, and this is kind of how he feels, and this is how they're surprised. But remember, he doesn't want to scare them, and blah blah blah. And you can kind of give more like so in that art direction, it's almost like you're a film director. And I hate melding film and comics, because they comics is its own thing, right? So you'll never see in something from me where I talk about put the camera here. I always say the reader's eye. You know what I mean? Just to be kind of keep it honest and comicsy. But similar to a film director is kind of like, well, here's a little bit of background. Here's some of the almost the character motivation, right, now it comes from. And occasionally, if I think something cool can be done on a page, that I'll say, okay, I'll put it out there, but I'll put it out there in a way that it doesn't have to be dictated. And again, it's simple things. It's like a good example is Huey, Dewey, and Louie, right? I really do treat them as kind of a 3-in-1 type of character. So something easy for everybody to any reader, you don't have to be a writer to understand this, is just they'll finish each other's sentences, right?
Yeah,
they'll go from one to the other to the other. And if you're clever, sometimes I can be too clever by half. But if you're clever, it's not just, hey, what's going on? We're going to the store, and then we're coming home after that. Like those 3 lines, that would be boring. That's just one line said 3 ways. So the idea is to make it one line, but everyone still has its own kind of twist on it and meaning. And off the top of my head, I can't give you an example. But so, and that's fine. And that's on me because it's in the dialogue, basically, right? For the art, I kind of in discussing in the development, I said you should always give, when possible, if you see if all three kids are in the panel, you should take advantage of doing like a sequence of art. So it almost looks like it's one person doing three separate actions, you know? The best I know it's hard to explain, but the example that comics people tend to get is like, remember like you'd read an old Spider-Man comic especially, or a Daredevil comic, and they would knock out all the line work and you'd see like, he would kick one guy in the face and then you'd see the speed line, motion, another guy, he'd kick another, and then he'd do a somersault, and then he'd land on a trash can and jump off of it. And then like the last panel, he's like fully there with all the color, all the line work, all the, you know, that we kind of shadow through the thing, with a sequence in one panel. So I said, like, let's do stuff like that, which is kind of, you know, not that I invented it, because I'm just telling you about all that you can think of a million times that was done with Spider-Man or Daredevil or anyone else. But one of the no-nos to do as a new writer is to put multiple actions in a panel, right? Because you can't, it's not a movie. You can't say in the panel, Uncle Scrooge picks up the pen and he gives it to Huey, who then, you know what I mean? He can either be picking it up, or he can be giving it, or he can be in the middle of that action. And you know, so kind of the mark of an amateur writer is when they put multiple actions in. So I said, well, you know, don't think of it as multiple actions. And I'm not saying put Huey on the left and then make him move 1/4 of the way up to the right, and then put Dewey over here. Like, I would never do that, because, you know, I might as well draw it then, and nobody wants me drawing any books. You know, so, but it was kind of like, hey, you know, keep in mind that you can do that whenever, and you should do that, because that'll give us kind of you know, gimmicks aren't a bad thing. Gimmicks are only bad when they you rely on them to the detriment of the story. But these kind of tricks of the trade is maybe a better word than gimmick. So I will, you know, say generally do that type of stuff. And if it's really something that's specific to like a scene, panel, I might mention that in the art direction also. But you know, the artist has to make it work, and that's all I really care about. And that's, you know, that's kind of an answer everyone gives, and I think some people believe it more than others when they say it. But to me, it's like, you know, it's always going to take me, you know, a couple of hours to write a scene, let's say, of a few pages. Think about it, write it, edit it, blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. But, you know, to do 3 or 4 pages take an artist a week. You know, so it's
right.
I used to read, you know, one of my favorite books as a kid was Savage Sword of Conan. And, it was later in the run, right? So, you know, I'm a fan of Ernie Chan as opposed to John Buscema. Although you know, you go back and you read all the Buscema stuff, and it's so great. Mm-hmm. But Roy Thomas would write, you know, have Conan fighting alongside a tribe of, you know, tribe A, and they're fighting tribe B, and you know, they're on horseback and spears and axes. And you say, yeah, it probably took Roy Thomas. You know, he wrote that while he was having lunch and eating a sandwich, and then Ernie Chan had to spend a week drawing that spread. You know, so
definitely
respect the time of your artist.
No, for sure. That's a great answer. Again, it's one of those things that as a reader and somebody who's always thought about creating comic books, I think it's always fun to hear about how the creative process is approached, because there are different styles and there are different, you know, we see different chemistries work really well with some teams. And so that's something that's really great to hear about.
Yeah. And, you know, it takes a while to get used to working with somebody, and you really do tend to do less as a writer, the longer you're working with somebody. At least you should tend to do less.
Kind of less is more.
Yeah. And because they get it, and they've been on it so long, and they know what you're going for, and they know what it looks like, and they know what's important, even thematically, right? So, you know, I can talk about, hey, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, but that's, you know, that's kind of a background thing. It's mostly just what's happening in this panel, what's happening in the next one, and set it up. And, you know, maybe say, you know, obviously if I only have one panel on a page, it's a splash, so it's an important moment. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you know, it takes, you know, you can look at a lot of different books, even your favorite runs of stuff, and you realize it doesn't get good for a few issues, right? With an artist, writer, artist team up, because that's you getting used to them. But with, you know, and I'm not saying this to sell copies. With Uncle Scrooge, there was and Ducktales, there was no learning curve, because I think this is because Tommaso comes from a studio over in Italy where they just those guys have been all working on Disney stuff for the European market. They have tons and tons and tons of experience. So I'm thinking of the cartoon, I'm thinking of the script, and when it comes back, it's the perfect thing that you want as a writer. It's exactly what I thought of, and then in parenthesis, but better. You know what I mean? And that's how it's really coming across. And
nice.
But I don't take any credit for it because I could probably say almost nothing, and it would look just exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because the quality as an individual that Tommaso Randa is, as he puts on the page, but also just like I said, the experience of working on DuckTales and all the Disney stuff over the years. And we were supposed to do these flashbacks that I'm talking about, and you'll see when they come out, they're in 8-panel grids, just like Carl Barks used to do it. And they're decent. The colors are a little flatter, and the lettering is even a little bit different, a little bit more hand drawn looking. And the idea was, like I said, kind of an old, publisher trick. It's like, well, we're back up to 22 pages because, comics were, when I was editing, were all 22 pages, and then they kind of came 20 pages for a long time, and now some more people are doing 22 pages. But it's a grind to get that stuff done as an artist all the time. So you can have a fill-in issue, and hopefully, if you do it right, you say, okay, well, it's the Halloween issue, so we'll have a different spooky artist do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But for the Uncle Scrooge stuff, it's like, well, if we put 4 or 6 pages of flashback in every issue, we can use a second artist on that who can do it. And that'll always make it easier for Tommaso to deliver his best stuff because he won't have any deadline crunches. But he wouldn't give it up. He wouldn't give up the flashbacks, and they look great. And they look great. And now I'm sure when everyone reads them, say, well, thank God they didn't give them to anybody else because they're a highlight of the book. And him wanting them to be a highlight of the book, he says, oh, so at least for now, he's doing all those kind of Barks style, old fashioned grids. And it's just like I said, he's that great of an artist. And I think I get the feeling that he's been drawing Disney in his head for a long time as he's drawing it on the page for different projects. So it's amazing stuff. It's a real top notch.
Well, that's awesome, and it's something that I've noticed. I've done interviews. Elliot Kalin did the Hades and Hercules, so I've been kind of following the Dynamite Disney stuff for a while now, and I have really enjoyed just sort of I don't know if you really call it editorial, but the creative overlook of it has been very spot on. Like the art has been spot on. The stories, they feel like they're the adaptations kind of come to life in comic book form. And I'm curious about that. Speaking of adaptations, so obviously you're adapting into kind of comic book form. Of course, you've got a long history of these characters being in comic books, but I think most people at this point probably remember the cartoons. But it makes me wonder, you mentioned several times earlier in the interview, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. I'm just curious. I think I have to ask about this. I know it's kind of getting off DuckTales a little bit. Sure. What was that experience like seeing characters you created and especially with Moon Girl and that story get adapted to the screen? I know you mentioned some of the differences there, but was that surreal? Was that just, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, well, it's so cool anyway. Like I said, I'm old enough that I remember, not having what we have now as far as all the movies and all the TV shows and all the everything else. So I remember, when I worked at DC Comics, which is in Manhattan, obviously, their offices were Midtown. I lived downtown, and you literally walked Broadway all the way, basically with only a couple of side streets. It's almost a direct line between, my place and the DC offices, but it's a long walk. It was about 40 blocks, which is about 2 miles, right? So how long does that take? I don't know. About 40 minutes, maybe a little bit less. But it goes right through Times Square. And Times Square is obviously very touristy, and I would save 5 minutes if I didn't have to walk through Times Square. And if I was going to say if it was raining, I wouldn't go through Times Square, but if it was raining, I wouldn't be walking home, I guess, right? So I'd be on the subway. But to walk home, and I just I always like to go. It's literally you don't think about it unless. So the reason I always did going home, never coming in, not just because you're late in the morning because you're sleeping, but just because it's slightly downhill also. So you can you would never think of it, but it's like a 5% grade downhill for the most most part.
Hey, it makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. But anyway, I'm getting off track. So I'd always like to do that, and I remember seeing, I think it was 300, and then you'd see different movie things, and just saying, hey man, like imagine that I'm walking now through Times Square, and they have an advertisement for a comic, and I'm certainly not friends with Frank Miller, but he's one of us. You know what I mean? And I just work with him a little bit. And that stuff is so great. And, whenever somebody that I did work more closely with, like Jeff Lemire, when like Sweet Tooth got on Netflix or stuff like that, it's like, wow, it's such a great feeling to be a part of that, which is, I think is everybody understandable. And then back in February, you could walk through Times Square. I wasn't working at DC anymore, but, they had the Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur cartoon flashing on one of the big billboards. So, just like in that sense, it's like a dream come true, but in a very real sense, I approached Moon Girl as to make her a Marvel character. And as much as I like to write Spider-Man or Wolverine or Nimrod or whomever you want it to be, it's like, what makes Marvel, and you can say the same thing with DC, obviously, these shared universes, is that it's, hundreds of creators working on thousands of pages over a few decades. So to me, I wanted to create a character that other people could write. You know what I mean? So to me, I kind of put it this way. I had the big Marvel Universe poster. It was like if you took all the covers of the second series of Marvel Universe and put them together, it made a continuous image. Ed Hannigan did all that art. If you go to Midtown Comics, it's like you go up those stairs and they got the huge poster of all the Marvel Universe. So as much as it was cool to see Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur when I flipped on the TV or when I was walking through Times Square, there was an Alex Ross poster of the Marvel Universe, right, that they put out whenever, 10 years ago. It wouldn't be 10 years ago because Moon Girl's not 10 yet, but I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And had everybody, but it also had Devil Dinosaur and Moon Girl in it. And to me, that was like the coolest thing too, because you made it
nice
part of that universe. So as much as it would be great if they took one of my Uncle Scrooge stories and made a cartoon out of it one day, or any of the creator-owned stuff I did, like Rocket Girl or something like that, it was a little more special to me actually with Moon Girl than it might be even if it was something that's totally my own creation, because what I wanted to do was make a character that other creators would want to use. So when she shows up as a guest star in something, that's cool too. But the fact that it was a cartoon and somebody else took it and made it into that and introduced the character to so many viewers, that was really special. And the price of that is that they're going to put their own spin on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't make cartoons for a living, so I'm not gonna. I can sit around and say, "Oh, why'd they do this or why'd they do that?" But they were always very nice to me and still are. Always very grateful and deferential and say, "Oh, you created this," and almost like in a Hollywood sense. Not to, if any of them are listening, not to say that it's phony, but they really know how to butter you up, and they always buttered me up, and they don't have to, because it's like I'm so excited that they're doing it, and the fact that they're doing it different. Like I said, it's the price to pay that another creator found it interesting enough to take your character and run with it. And they changed it no more than I changed Devil Dinosaur, right? So all's fair. And
true. I mean, in the comics, we constantly see the reinvention,
right? And as even a curmudgeon like Alan Moore, who hates his adaptations for a lot of different reasons, I'm sure. You got to say, well, my books are still on the shelf behind me, so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, I mentioned my daughter earlier. I'll just share this story. You might think this is cool. Maybe you've just heard it a million times, but watching her watch Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur was just really fun, because she's like, oh my gosh, she's like an inventor, so I can run around and pretend like I'm inventing stuff, and she's got a T-Rex, like it's just the coolest thing in the world. So made her that much more into shows like that, watching Miss Marvel, really helping kind of this next generation get into some of these characters in comics. And to me, that's amazing. That's what I think comic books needed. We need that next generation really invested. So in that sense, it was really fun watching that.
Yeah, because it's like, look, like I said, I kind of named some oddball cartoons. That stuff's really important to me. It's not just He-Man and Transformers and G.I. Joe and the main than the main hits. It's all the little things too. And I really think, like, how many of us are going to be remembered? Maybe, like Frank Miller be remembered. That'd be great. But really only Shakespeare is remembered. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Otherwise you're just kind of part of the process. And you kind of, you spend your time on stage a little bit, and you hopefully make the industry a little better. You make the medium a little better. But the most important thing you do is to get fans excited about your things. And, as much as I would like to write that Punisher with an Uzi shooting up people all over the place story, I like working in stuff that's aimed at and marketed towards younger readers, because that is so important to them in their life. And I remember that. And I think we all do, like I said, I look behind you and I see all this stuff on the wall, and obviously you're doing this, this YouTube channel and everything else. And I say this a lot. I was, the editor on All-Star Superman, and it's a great book. And I had nothing to do with it creatively. That was all the vision. It came fully baked, and we make sure that people get paid, basically, right? But my point is, All-Star Superman is a great story. One of the best superhero stories of all time. One of the best Superman stories of all time. No doubt about it, right?
Yeah.
But, when I was doing that, I was like 40 then or whatever, just turned 40, whatever the case may be. 40-something Brandon loves All-Star Superman, but not as much as 12-year-old Brandon loved West Coast Avengers by like Al Milgrom. You know what I mean? Like, you can't compete with how excited they get about that stuff. And there's something that said, well, why are we doing this except to make people happy? And like you said, so with all due respect to All-Star Superman, I was there when won all the Eisners, you know what I mean, and getting the awards. I was there obviously for every page that came in. How many kids is that going to inspire? Whether or not they create comics or read comics their whole life or just do something else, there's something to be said about working on Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And that was kind of shown in the numbers, right? Because it was, if like I said, I know your channel and a lot of other guys are more collector focused, right? Well, it's like, if you want to put together a run of any Marvel book in the history of Marvel, the hardest one to put together, obviously not Silver Age that's expensive or anything, but there's actual copies out there. You ain't going to find anything with less copies than Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. But that's just as a single issue. It made all of its money. And the reason we did it for 50 issues was because it got collected, and that did really well. And it got collected and sold in through the Scholastic book fairs, and that did phenomenally well.
Right on.
So it was like, I know all that stuff. And people say, oh, they're just keeping it around for one reason or another. And it's like, nah, like my royalty checks are much on Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur are much bigger than a lot of other people who are working on Daredevil and Hawkeye and even in team books and all that other type of stuff, because it reached this kid audience, which is said, I'm kind of happy to do it. And maybe, like I said, maybe if my career path took me down, hey, you're writing Spider-Man, and I was that guy, maybe I'd be singing a different tune. I can't say that I'm not biased, but I'm really glad to be working on stuff that a kid loves so much. It's not just something that they're gonna read to kind of pass the time or just escape after a bad day, which I do all the time with a lot of books that are geared more towards guys like you and me. So I'm not discounting that either. But yeah, there is an extra specialness, and it's why I embrace. Whereas I think earlier on, I might worry about doing Ducktales if they offered it to me, because I got Moon Girl because I did Rocket Girl, but Rocket Girl wasn't a kid's book. It had teenage characters in it. But except if you read it, it's that's so we love Rocket Girl. Can you do our kids book Moon Girl? So, well, Rocket Girl's not a kids book, so you kind of pretend they didn't say that, and you play along, and then you get the gig. But there might have been a time where I would have turned down, I guess you call it typecast, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do just kid stuff, and there's only so many hours in the day. But now it's like, like I said, it's hard to sit here, and I can't say that that's not the kinds of jobs I get offered the most. Like I said, maybe I'm deluding myself, but I don't think so. I'm happy doing it.
Right on. Well, and I know, just to kind of bring it back to DuckTales here at the end, I know a lot of people are going to be excited. I know I'm personally excited. Like I said, it's going to be a great book for me to read with my daughter. So I can't wait to do that. That's going to be really fun. I know a lot of people out there feel the same way, or if they just want to, dip their toes in the nostalgia, check out what's going on with the characters and what's going on with Duckburg. Once again, I do want to remind everybody, DuckTales #1 is coming out November 6th. So make sure you go pick up wherever your comics are sold and, get on that poll list for DuckTales and see what's coming from Brandon Montclare on the DuckTales title. Super excited. Before we leave, I just got to ask, and I totally understand if you're not allowed to do this, but do you have any teasers or any kind of seeds you want to plant, kind of tease people to keep reading for stories past that first arc? Anything we can kind of see coming down the road?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think it'll in the next couple of weeks we'll settle exactly what it is. But you got to get these books approved in batches. So there's a technical reason why I know exactly what I'm doing now and kind of what I'm doing in the middle and what I might do further down the road is because it's not all in-house like it was when I worked at DC or at Marvel, where it's like, okay, well, I'll walk across the street and see if we're approved to do this. There's a lot of back and forth, and that's Nate Cosby, our editors, our fearless editor's job to do. But what immediately followed the first arc is A Christmas Story, and it made a little bit more sense because it looked like it might fit in when we were first thinking about launching the book. But you can't do an Uncle Scrooge story without Christmas. Now, whether that'll be issue 6, I don't think so, because it puts it in April or something like that, and that's a little too far away. But the idea was to do something big with everybody. So to do a holiday issue, I like doing that type of stuff. So to make up for it being mostly about Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie, it's everyone's going to be in issue 6. But if that has to get pushed back, still look for issue 6 to be the biggest bonanza and find a wacky story, which, put your fingers in your ears if you're critical. It's not going to be the most plot-driven, tightest mystery story. It's just going to be a big extravaganza where it's a cool story with everything. And we're talking about Claremont X-Men. One of the things I want to do, maybe if I can't do that Christmas story, and since it'll be in the spring, is kind of do a softball good guys versus bad guys story where they're all playing baseball.
Nice.
That might be a little bit, literally, that might be a little bit too much inside baseball that they don't let me do it. But that's if I can't get that done for issue 6, I'm going to try to get that done somewhere down the road. But so read the first 5 issues. It's a nice story. I'm really proud of it. But like I said, it's going to be just a blast, whatever is in issue 6.
Right on. Well, Brandon, I just want to thank you for your time today. It was really cool hearing about some of the background here and some of your background as well. Thank you so much for that. Really excited to check out the story. Everybody, remember to go and get your pre-orders in. DuckTales #1 launching November 6th. Thank you, Brandon.
Christopher, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Right on. I just want to remind everybody, as always, read comics every day.
I sure do.